Great. So good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. For those of you like me and Jane that both are walking into this with a little bit of a COVID haze, take mercy on us. Um, this is a meeting of the steering committee of the Vermont Climate Council. And as is our usual practice, we encourage everyone to join as a public meeting. We generally try to keep folks on camera if you're a member of the Climate Council, of the steering committee of the Climate Council, or if you're helping us present today. If you're a member of the public joining us, we encourage you to join in the public comment and ask that you keep your camera off while we're having our meeting. All right. Jane just threw in the chat that, and I'm going to throw the the link to all the documents for today in the chat right here. Let me just pull up the agenda and walk us through, and we can just make sure we're on board with this. I'll share my screen if you give me 1 second. Okay, so we're trying to do a couple things. Of critical importance is looking at the council agenda for 2 weeks from now. So we need to walk through that and feel comfortable with that. And so we've got a couple bullet points there that we want to make sure we cover, and other things that are important to you. Jane has prepared a sort of draft outline for the revised climate action plan that builds off the initial climate action plan, and she can walk you through that, and we can talk about how that's looking and revisions that you might want to see. Liz has prepared a little memo, a short 1-page memo about some of these cross-cutting issues that we don't want to fall through the cracks and don't have a neat pathway in the existing subcommittee structure. So Liz will walk us through that and that suggestion of how those things will work. Kelly will walk us through quite a clever document. I've just been looking at it that Just Transitions put together, a visual guide, and give us a quick orientation to that. Unfortunately, we only have 10 minutes for it, so it'll have to be kind of quick. And then there's a final thing we need to do. Sorry. We'll see if we have time for the final thing, but remember last time in August, we talked about some very minor changes, but changes to the governance document that are specifically about sort of needing to be a resident of Vermont to be part of the subcommittees. And so we didn't have that document handy to approve it. Now we have it as part of your meeting materials. So to approve, to review, and finalize those edits. And then finally, if we have time, I'm going to say the if because I'm looking at this agenda thinking, oh my goodness, maybe we can do this, is we want to just circle back one more time and talk about that prioritization piece that's going to come up into October, November. It's not mission critical. We don't get to it today, but it'd be good to, again, get our minds around the kinds of work and guidance we want to provide subcommittees on the prioritization and the output we're looking for. We are going to have time for public comment at the end. So stick with us if you'd like to chime in. Okay, so that's our agenda. Any questions, comments, concerns on what we're going to try to do this morning? Okay, let's dive in. Okay, so the first thing is the council agenda. And you know what I'm going to just do? I'll keep sharing my screen because it's just my browser, and I'll pull this up. Again, this is a draft based on the last time we spoke, and just me and Liz and Jane trying to put our thoughts down on paper. So I'll walk through it, and then there's a couple of things we want to pause on. What we're looking at for this agenda is we actually need some thoughts on this, and I think maybe Jane, you have some thoughts on the Just Transition reflection. Let's talk about that in just a second. Then we want to have a conversation with the full council about this draft outline that we'll talk about today. We need to do a final review and approval of the updated social cost of greenhouse gases that we looked at in the last council meeting. But as our standard practices, we do 2 meetings on substantive things. And they provided some feedback. And Jared, there's a new version of that, right? Based on the feedback from the last council meeting. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that was approved at the last Science and Data Subcommittee meeting, the revised version.
Yeah, we've just put 10 minutes in here for that, and the assumption that we went through it last time. So let me know, Jared, if you think 10 minutes is gonna be enough. And then actually I take it back. 10 minutes here, some public comment, and then come back and make a decision is the way we thought about it. So whenever we're making a decision like this, trying to inject some public comment in the middle after discussion. We wanted to take a break and then come back and talk about public engagement activities that have been happening and will be happening over the summer and into the fall, and give the council just a time to reflect on what's being heard in those and what's happening. And so we've baked in some time to just sit with what's coming out in these pieces, and also to help plan the fall stakeholder events, and let the council weigh in on how those could happen. And that's it. That's all we were going to do. I'll just say one quick note, which is the last time we all spoke as a steering committee, you as a steering committee, that you had asked, will some subcommittees be ready to present some substantive content in this meeting? And I think the general feeling was probably not. And so we're not baking that into this agenda to have sort of draft content coming out of subcommittees, the three sort of subcommittees that are leading the writing. Okay, so that's the agenda. And as I mentioned earlier, there were some bullets we had put in what we want to talk about. One is consider equity training proposal from Just Transitions to be added as maybe even as the Just Transitions moment. Do we need to do the governance edits, the ones that you all are going to review and ideally approve? Do we need to sort of make a piece in the agenda about that for the full council? And that's it. And then review and provide feedback. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. I'm happy to pull it back up. But steering committee members, how are you feeling about that agenda? What revisions would you make to it? Any thoughts? Jane, you want to add in something?
Right, my dogs started to bark at the wrong time, but I was just going to offer to see if Kelly wanted Griffin. If Griffin, not Griffin, if Kelly wanted to offer a summary of the Just Transitions reflection, which is really about Kelly. I understand and expect that there has been some discussion with the Office of Racial Equity about a training for the whole council. And I thought that we could talk about and reflect on why that's needed and how it works into sort of the process and the timing of the work of the council this fall, and think about that as an update to the council at the September meeting, and then put forward the training after.
Yes, and when you said put forward the training, so to fill everybody in, yes, we were talking with Shalini from the Office of Racial Equity, and we had a great training, but it was like 4 years ago from Susanna Davis. And so we've had turnover. Any of us who were at that training probably could use a refresher. So we thought it was high time to have a little bit more training. And so we were talking to Shalini, and her ideal, and I think this is a good idea, would be to have a dedicated meeting outside of normal council meetings that would be about 90 minutes, where we could really dig deep and get into this, make sure our vocabulary is aligned, make sure everyone, talk about what does equity mean in the climate space, and all of that kind of thing. And so that would be our hope, but I do think using the Just Transitions moment to talk about how that's going to happen, why it's going to happen, that makes sense, Jane. And I don't know, this document that we have to look at a little bit later in our agenda today, that would also, I think, if we're happy with it going forward, or have some minor edits, having that also be talked about at that time might make sense, because they sort of go hand in hand. So that would be a thought that I think would be an appropriate use of that time.
Okay, great. How do others feel about that? Thanks, Kelly. Sound good? Liz? Yeah. Jared says yes. Julie? All good? Okay, great. Okay, so let's do that. Liz, yeah, go ahead.
Just another item on the agenda, I guess, question for Jared that David, you mentioned. I was originally concerned at the short amount of time on the updated discussion on the social cost of carbon. I'm looking at I guess it's August 8th. I guess, what's the version of change and where can we just check it and how much change is there? And whether that timing is adequate. I'm looking at the August 8th draft from the subcommittee, wondering if that's it, because I don't see it in our agenda.
Yeah, I don't believe it is attached in this agenda. The changes that were made were very minor. They were clarifying. It was really to make sure that any future updates of the social cost, the adopted social cost of greenhouse gases would follow the National Academy of Sciences recommendations, just to make that abundantly clear. So we added that language in it in a couple of key places. But the basic substance context of it is all the same as we reviewed before.
Liz, you feel that's good enough time then? Okay.
David, I have a question in that same space.
Yeah.
Let me make sure I hung up on my other. All right. Not creating my own feedback.
Yeah.
Just in terms of the social cost of carbon conversation, I would be interested in having is just how we present benefit cost analysis. And I don't know if it fits here when we're talking about adopting the updated social cost of carbon or not. But the idea of separating sort of direct costs, direct benefits, and then kind of the societal benefits that the social cost of carbon represents, and kind of provided that complete accounting as part of our work. I know it doesn't belong in the document Jared has shared around regarding the Science and Data Subcommittee recommendation. It feels like more of a policy decision for the Climate Council, and it probably doesn't have to come up at our meeting in 2 weeks, but it seems like something important as we think about the cap and how we're going to represent the costs and benefits of different policy alternatives we're contemplating.
I wonder, yeah, Jared, jump in on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a really good point, and my recollection is that we've already made a decision as a council that whenever there's economic analysis presented, either in the climate action plan or as an addendum to the climate action plan, that the different types of benefits and costs be broken out so that we can see, consumer savings versus or consumer costs or savings versus societal benefits. And I think that that's all really important to be broken out so that we can have a comprehensive and nuanced and transparent conversation about all those things. I think that this part of the agenda, though, is really about updating what values Vermont is using for this social cost of greenhouse gases to align with the latest science and the EPA's latest report. So I see it as kind of fairly narrow, but I agree with Secretary Moore that going forward, having spaces for broader conversation about economic analysis, which I think is kind of frequently simplified and misunderstood, is a good thing. But I do feel confident that at least going into the CAP, we have already committed ourselves to very detailed, nuanced presentations of the different ways to measure these things.
Yeah, I'm happy for it to be the economic conversation to be separated from this one. So,
just as a thing for the notes, I think, is it fair to say that when the next time the council talks about economic analysis, whether through the analysis is going to be commissioned, like going to be done through contractors or other reason, that would be a good time to provide this greater, this greater depth of conversation? Is that the right time?
I mean, I think we probably need to make sure we have a shared framework in providing direction to contractors so that we're getting information reported back to us in a way that allows for that kind of discussion to take place, David, and so worried that if we wait until reports start to be returned, we may get inconsistent, I guess, data back, which would be part of the reason to talk about it a little bit sooner and make sure that we're all collectively on the same page on how we want that information brought back to us and presented.
Okay. Liz?
Yeah, I'm just reflecting that it's definitely come up in the cross-sector subcommittee in terms of not just how we're going to do it, but who and then what the subcommittee process is, or the committee process rather, for reviewing. And just so I guess I'm agreeing with Secretary Moore that it needs to be earlier rather than later, because there's definitely a desire in that committee to have more direction there on how it's happening, who's doing it, and what the committee level of review is regarding that information when it comes to specific policies.
So after this September meeting, the next council meeting, I believe, is not until December, although I may be wrong about that. So I just want to flag that to say, do we need to make space for this now, or can it wait for that later meeting? Jared?
I just wanted to comment on something that Jane put in the chat, that for folks who don't see that or don't have access to it, that right now the only study underway that is including economic analysis that ANR's commissioned and the council is looking forward to is the cap and invest study, or the transportation policy options study. I'm on that review group. This conversation has happened in a really in-depth, consistent way about kind of a holistic and kind of broken out and detailed presentation of the economic analysis. And Jane can provide the exact dates, but my understanding is that draft isn't going to be ready to be presented until after the new year. So I do think it would be good to have this conversation in advance of, or right before at least that is shared. But that work is already underway, and the review team at least has been really clear on this question. So I guess I would question whether it is, I think it's an important thing. I just don't think it's urgent right now, and certainly I think could wait until December or January ahead of the presentation of the draft results back to, and which I think will happen not first with the council, but with the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee.
Okay. All right. So what I'm hearing, if I'm hearing correctly, is that while important, it is not urgent for September, and could be like what Jared said, in connection with that cap and invest study, and that the review team is providing that guidance that Secretary Moore said is important to provide. Anything else to say on that before I test for other things to do, other revisions to the council agenda? Okay. All right. So anything else for the council agenda? What we've talked about so far is we have a plan now for the Just Transitions reflection moment. We're not making changes to the timing or the focus of that social cost of greenhouse gases piece. We've flagged that there is important conversation to have around how you do economic analysis and talk about direct costs, direct benefits, societal costs, et cetera, but we don't need to do that right now. Is there any other changes? Do you want me to pull up the agenda, look at it one more time? Anything else you'd want to say about this agenda? Here, I'll do it one more time. Okay, so Just Transitions, draft outline, updated social costs of greenhouse gases, a deep dive on what's happening in public engagement and what will happen, and then that's it. Okay, last call. All right. Thanks, folks. That's great. All right, let me just circle back to our agenda. So the next thing up for us is looking at Jane's draft outline. And Jane, do you want me to share my screen or do you want to do it? What would you like?
Either works. If it's easy for you because you're navigating, that'd be great.
Yeah.
So, in preparation for the council meeting in September, and in lieu of having substantive recommendations to consider at this juncture, David and I wanted to really start to think about the structure of the update to the climate action plan and start to think about with all of you what we bring forward from the current plan and what needs to be updated, revised, sort of redone completely, and then who the authors are. And so this is just a first step in thinking about how we're going to process and have that conversation with the Climate Council and our office and folks sort of embedded in the subcommittees. And I have discussed this and thought about ways that we can really build off the first plan, bring in stories and the public engagement work we're doing, as well as take some time to really think about how resilience and adaptation comes through as sort of equal and as important as the mitigation work that we know is needed as well. So that was the lens that we took when we were going through the existing plan, and then thinking about what was needed for this update. So why don't I don't think it'll take more than 2 to 3 minutes to just sort of run down and I'll just
Sounds
sort of
good.
hit on the sections that seem of most importance. So one question for you all is the land acknowledgement. I'll just go through the ones that are most seem most salient for discussion right now. The land acknowledgement, you'll all remember, was a process that we did after the plan was adopted. One that Judy Dow led us through as a council. It seems really relevant and seems that it could carry forward. I'm not an expert in knowing sort of how to use those and how appropriate would be and whether we'd like to go through that process again as a council. So I acknowledged it could be the same, but wanted to put that out to all of you. Most of the updates here at the top are just obvious. They need to be updated, and I've put in place where I think that work is being led. I'll go down to the Vermont energy economy and opportunities related to climate action. Jared, I believe that you took the lead on this last time, and so I reflected it as science and data, but correct me if I'm wrong. I think some of this came also from our consultant. And so Marion and I, in talking about this, this is one of those key areas where it feels like we could reflect resilience and adaptation in this work a little differently. And so we're recommending that you could change the title. We could change the title to Vermont Climate and Economy, Energy Resilience, and Opportunities Related to Climate Action. And so still feels like it could be led by science and data, but this could be in coordination with expertise on other subcommittees if needed. I do know that science and data has some great capacity now, though, and expertise for resilience. I'll just go through the whole thing and then we can go through comments. These are all pretty straightforward. The next one that feels important to touch base on is the coordination of the climate action plan and the CEP. Obviously, this is a section that is required by law in the GWSA, and I've never really quite understand why. Well, maybe I understand that that we have a particular heightened need for a lot of climate planning early in the GWSA to meet our early emissions reductions targets. But obviously, the CEP is updated every 6 years. The CAP's updated every 4 years. This time, it's not going to be intentionally coordinated with the CEP the way it was the first time. And so I thought that we could update this to really speak to, make sure that we reflect that by law, the plans need to be required and that the CAP is coordinated, built off the CEP, but note other state plans like the State Hazard Mitigation Plan, and sort of speak how they work together more coordinated. And then thought this was a nice opportunity to sort of pivot to also speaking about the resilience implementation strategy that will be becoming public on July 1st. August, also 2025, that our office is staffing for the governor and the treasurer. Keep going, keep going. These are all updates. These are all similar to the first cap. I don't have much to say. This is the substance and work of the subcommittees coming up. Cross-cutting pathways, I do just want to note here that we are reflecting that it sort of was buried behind all the sectoral recommendations in the CAP, but we're recommending that we move this to the front of the recommendation sections and pull this up to the top. I have both our office, since Liz will be helping to coordinate this work with all of you if you approve the memo we're going to talk about next, as well as obviously the council sort of leading on this, understanding that no one subcommittee will really focus on this. Cross-cutting themes, if the memo that Liz is going to talk about in a minute with you all carries forward, we're recommending removing this section and just really focused on recommendations in the pathways, not a theme section. Obviously, progress assessment and implementation should be updated and really become a new sort of inclusive chapter that really talks about what has happened since the first climate action plan. It could build off the assessment that the Climate Action Office worked on for the January meeting of the Climate Council, understanding that this is a section people might have diverging opinions on, how much progress has happened or lack thereof progress. I said that I felt like the Climate Office could support the tools, but this would probably be a section that would have to be authored by tone by the council. So we can talk about how that moves forward as we get to that. Legislative action and rulemaking, this was in the first cap as well, and I imagine we will really want to pull out all the recommendations again that require rulemaking up into its own chapter, as well as legislative action to have it succinctly in one place to access. So the rest are all straightforward, and then down under new chapters, I want to talk about two sections. You may recall that Marion and I had big ambitions after we published the first cap that we would work with the CMO, the Chief Marketing Office in the state, to sort of move the cap into a template that would make it look more visually appealing. I just want to reflect that I keep this on my desk, the main climate action plan, and hold it up as a model of something I would really like our plan to be, something you can hold and look at. And I said this to somebody the other day, but you can't open the main plan and not land on a story about a Maynard and how they see themselves in climate and climate action. And it's something that Sophie is really interested in helping us think about how we do this for the first client, for our plan this time. And so Sophie and I are meeting actually with David will know, Sarah Kern, and our CMO on Wednesday this week to talk about Maine's process for this, and then what they're looking at for their update to the plan and graphic design and a template that will help us get going earlier on this so we could have something a little more visually appealing this time. And Sophie's thinking about how to pull personal stories in that we're getting through our engagement and others for this plan. So I think that'll be a really nice addition this time. And if we can do it well from the beginning, we also have through CPRG planning grant, some money for marketing and specifically not a big pot though, but just a small pot for graphic design and marketing that we could access. So and there's bulk contracts through the CMO's office to access. So we're thinking about that. And then the final component of a new chapter would be the idea that David and I have been talking about with all of you after seeing the state hazard mitigation plan, having a significant number of actions and recommendations, but pulling forward the ones that are sort of utmost priority to move on ASAP, and talking about how we pull that up front and center for priority in the update to the plan. So that would be a subcommittee and council effort.
Right. Okay, so thanks, Jane. That was really helpful. And we want to have this conversation with the council, and we're doing this now with you all as a preview to that. So when we get feedback now, also think about how do you want to have this conversation with the full council about this? Jared, go ahead.
Yeah, I really like this outline, both the content of it and just how it's structured. I think it's helpful to have, the chapter name, the rationale, the responsibility, just so we're all clear on, who's taking point, and who would be involved. And I think that to answer your specific question, Jane, about the science and data subcommittee, we already kind of anticipated and spoke about the Vermont climate, what I think you relabeled the Vermont climate economy chapter. So I think that is aligned and sounds good. I think the only question that I had when I looked at this is, based on your description, Jane, are you envisioning the climate stories would be its own kind of standalone chapter, or that they would kind of be interspersed throughout in like call out boxes? Yeah. Okay.
Members of a focus group of young people.
Hey, Jael, your mic's coming through, Jael. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, it's sort of like using it
Better
throughout the
reflection, yeah.
document, I think is the vision, Jared. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, might just be good to explicitly name that before it goes to the council, just because it's
Okay.
listed under a new chapter.
Aha.
But otherwise, I think that this looks really good, and I appreciate the thought that went into it and the presentation of it. I think it's great.
Nice. Thanks, Jared. Kelly?
I love that idea of having the climate stories sprinkled throughout. And another thought I had would be to do a similar thing with maybe if like a plain language summaries throughout as well in a call out box, because I think that's a lot of the struggle for people to understand what's going on here. Is there isn't some of this obviously needs to have technical language, but a lot of it can be explained in really clear plain language. And then those things could also be compiled into a smaller document for someone who just wants to understand it, but doesn't want to go through the hundreds of pages to dig into all the different aspects of it.
Nice, Kelly. Thank you. So Ruby, we typically do public comment at a specific time at the end. So if you don't mind holding your hand to that, I don't know whether you're gonna be able to stay until 9:55.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I'm Bruce Wilson's intern, so I'm just here on behalf of him for the Human Rights Commissioner, and I'll just be taking his place in today's meeting. So not to intrude, but I did just have a quick comment about the climate stories, if that's all right. I don't think I'll be around at the end, unfortunately, but it's completely up to you guys. I know I'm just hopping in here, so.
Okay. I mean, if you're not able to stay to the end, that's fine. A quick comment or drop it in the chat or just quickly verbally right now is fine.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I just wanted to ask a quick question about the land acknowledgement at the beginning, and when was the last time that was updated, just because I know that there have been some more recent developments, specifically with the Abenaki community in Vermont and getting recognition, because they're not recognized by the state and federal government at the moment, and also kind of tying that into the climate stories, seeing if there was a plan for making sure that Native voices are included as a part of that storytelling. I just wanted to touch on that for a minute.
Okay. I think what we'll probably do, we'll take that on board. Thank you for putting those two things on the table. And Jane, if you could just reiterate the land acknowledgement and how that happened last time in the initial climate action plan, that might be helpful for everyone if folks don't know how that happened.
Sure. We met as a climate council, and it was January of 2022. and had a process where we collaboratively developed the land acknowledgement led by an Indigenous woman who serves on the Just Transition, well, actually on the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Involved us, while we did it remotely, it involved us, I remember going out and literally standing on the land.
Yeah, I thought we were actually some of us were in person in National Life, but yeah, you're
Yeah.
right.
Okay. Great. All right. So I'm just going to circle back to the steering committee members for now. And so in terms of how to have this conversation with the council in 2 weeks from now, are there other things or other reactions that would be helpful in the way we do this conversation 2 weeks from now? Anything else, steering committee members? Okay.
I mean, sorry, is it okay, David, to?
Yeah, jump in. Yeah.
One thing that I do wonder about, I feel like the next question then is timeline around drafting. And so, I mean, maybe that doesn't need to be part of this conversation. Maybe this is just like what's in, and then we figure out the process and timeline. But I do feel like it's going to be a natural next question of like, okay, so for those folks who are listed in that final column of responsibility, is it worth having a reminder of the timeline we're working backwards from in terms of when we want drafts ready for subcommittees to review and then for the council to review? It might be helpful, even if we don't dig into that a lot, to just say kind of here's a reminder of our existing timeline. Here's what the proposal would be, so that we have a sense of how much time is had for drafting and how quickly things will need to move by different folks who are listed in that responsibility column.
Thanks, Jared. Yeah. I wonder, even if Jane, if you can imagine in this chart, you would have some sort of like first draft, second draft kind of thing. It might be a little too busy for this chart, but something like
Oh
that.
yeah, I'm having flashbacks already of the dates and timelines and the drafts and the posting. Yeah. Mhm. But yes,
Yeah.
that is definitely where we have to go.
Okay. Great. Anything else, folks, on this? Okay. Super. Thank you all. Getting back to our next thing. This is where Liz has pulled together an approach for these cross-cutting issues. Liz, do you want to share that, or you want me to just keep sharing? What would your preference be?
Yeah, if you want to keep sharing, that's fine.
Great, I'll do it.
Annette noticed in the chat that I skipped over the energy burden choices section, and I don't remember exactly if there was a section like what it here. Hold on, if you don't mind.
I'll get it. Okay, here you go.
Thank you. Just before we move on, if there was. Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay, so that was a section. Yeah, I think I didn't touch on it, Annette, so I'm just going to respond right now. It's towards the bottom a bit. That we were proposing keeping in the cap, and that was worked on by Science and Data. So I didn't touch on it because it was not a substantive change, but it should be updated. So happy to hear your comments when we get to public comment about that, if there's something else to be noted. Thank you.
Great. Okay. All right. So Liz, here's the memo. Do you want to walk us through it?
Thank you. Yes. So in support of the plan and the update, we, the Climate Action Office, have been working to identify completion gaps and opportunities for the steering committee to consider in this next phase of the plan. And so we've identified 3 of the original pathways that could be continued to be supported as cross-cutting issues: workforce development, education, and compact settlement. And this stems from acknowledgement of pathways that were completed from the last cap, as well as pathways that could be moved to other subcommittees that have expertise in those areas. So looking at from completion with the environmental justice pathway and the recommendation to create environmental justice policy that was completed in 2022 when the environmental justice law was passed. And then the state government, community and partnership capacity, that pathway was completed in 2022 as well when the Climate Action Office was stood up. And then there were 2 cross-cutting pathways that we were recommending to be moved to cross-sector mitigation. And those are building codes and transportation, because expertise resides in that subcommittee. And then looking at the 3 that we're recommending to be continue to be supported as cross-cutting issues with education, workforce, and compact settlement, we're recommending that 3 groups are created with subcommittee members who have expertise in each group area, and that there would be 2 meetings with each group. And that Climate Action Office would be supporting this work, so that in the first meeting, we'll be proposing actions for each of these groups, receiving feedback from the members. And then the second meeting would be really to finalize these edits and changes, and then also noting that these groups would work to identify volunteers that could dedicate time with the drafting of these actions as well. So that's the recommendation for cross-cutting issues moving forward.
Thanks, Liz. That's great. Okay. Questions, reactions, Kelly?
Quick question. Since these are going to be public meetings, are people who participate from the council and the subcommittees eligible for the full $50 per diem for these? They participate as like full members?
I'm not, Jane, do you know?
Good
Not
question.
sure.
Can we say yes?
I think that's
Why
important.
we
if
can't
that
say
can-
yes to that?
If that can be done, I think that's really important, just to make sure that we have good participation from a diversity of voices. So I would advocate for that if it's possible within the law and the scope of what we can do.
I'm sorry, so you're asking for full meetings so that they can be full per diems and not hourly rates, is that what?
Yes, well, it looks like at least the first 2 would be public. I don't know if all of them would be, but at least the first 2 for participating members, if those at least could have the per diem, the full $50 per diem. And then there's benefits to doing that going forward. There are also obviously benefits to not having every single meeting open to the public, so that there's a little bit more agility in developing, written documents and stuff that you can't do easily in a big open public meeting. But I just would love to make sure that whenever there's a possibility for people to get the full $50 per diem, that we do that.
Very much appreciate that, Kelly. And maybe we should just note, and Secretary Moore can speak to this, we obviously have a budget for the way we pay per diems out of the A&R budget. And we typically carry enough money to pay for some additional public meetings such as these, but there's this request around these new groups forming in the space. This is something for the steering committee really to consider, because it was a note that we made specific about task groups, so that and that was to be able to advance work products more simply in service of decision-making bodies like subcommittees. But obviously, if everything was public, there would be an impact on the budget. And there's also the ask around the equity training. I suspect these are discrete asks, but we can note if Secretary Moore is comfortable with them tracking things like this to ensure that we're coordinating with our business office, that there's enough funding to pay for per diems and above and beyond what we have sort of easily calculated with respect to subcommittees and council meetings. So
and Jane, just so I'm clear, this is a total of 6 meetings that's being envisioned here?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, let's take that up offline, but my gut would be we should be able to accommodate that. It's a little bit challenging in a cap year because there are more meetings occurring than there are off cycle. And so we'll just need to look at where we sit today. with maybe first quarter data, or in a few weeks, maybe with first quarter data. And perhaps that's a great plug if people could submit their per diem expense requests before the end of this month. It will help us understand if we'll have resources available to be able to do what you've asked, Kelly.
Okay, great. Yes. Other questions, thoughts about this approach for dealing with these three issues? And as Jane and Liz pointed out, it's consolidating what was in the initial cap under cross-cutting pathways and then these cross-cutting themes, and it's just consolidating into these three cross-cutting issues that'll be under cross-cutting pathways. Jane?
Just one comment, because Liz, you might have mentioned this and I didn't notice it, but because the building codes component, as well as, I forget, expertise on building codes and transportation, moving back to cross-sector, some of these still do really overlap very much with rural resilience. And I know Andrea has made an effort to reach out to Melissa and Rich about sort of ensuring expertise from rural resilience be part of that conversation, knowing that the reason they were themes in the first place is building codes obviously impact home resilience as well as cutting energy and costs in house. So there has, just because we're giving them to the lead subcommittee doesn't mean there shouldn't be expertise brought in from other subcommittees.
Thanks, Jane. Liz?
Yeah, substantively, that's where I was going. How much does our discussion today at steering committee affect, if at all, where these particular cross-cutting issues are going to show up in the cap itself? And I guess the substantive part of my question is, I read about building and transportation and the reasoning behind that in the memo. When it comes to compact settlement, my mind immediately goes to whether that's almost too narrow of a description, and instead we should be in this updated climate action plan talking more about shared infrastructure opportunities generally. We saw flooding again just recently. We've certainly seen the overlap between the need for resilience thinking as well as just plain old hardening of infrastructure that also helps with mitigation. When I think about the energy and electric space in particular, those two things overlap. And so the procedural question is, how much does this matter in terms of where it fits within the cap? Because I think that structural and procedural aspect can then also influence the substance. And I guess the more substantive question is, are we sure that we're focusing broadly enough, I guess, when it comes to compact settlement? And I would include in that transportation and building, because although I hear what you're saying on who owns it, really it is cross-cutting. So I do have some concern that those cross-cutting pathways are not kind of fully captured in what I'm seeing.
Thanks, Liz. That feels like two questions.
Yeah, you're right. It is.
Yeah. And so let's chew on those for a second. Secretary Moore.
What Liz said reminded me that, I think last time when we talked about compact settlement, we were really focused on sort of walkable, sustainable communities where people weren't reliant on cars. Following the last 2 summers worth of flooding, I think there are also a lot of concerns that need to be folded in about resilience and sort of what our traditional settlement patterns look like in Vermont, which may, and whether reinvesting in sort of core downtown areas known to be prone to flooding is something how we balance, I guess, those two different interests. I meant to go back and look at the climate plan and see if we'd even notioned that, but I do think that that's an area of just maybe talking mostly about settlement patterns could be helpful.
Thanks, Julie. Jared?
Yeah, thanks, Liz, for bringing this up. One of the things that kind of came into my head about this is, when we talk about cross-cutting, are we primarily talking about issues that cross-cut across the different subcommittees, or are we talking about cross-cutting across different sectors? It seems like primarily we're talking about cross-cutting across the different subcommittees, but like one of the ways that this is coming up in the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee is, you know, you've got transportation and thermal task groups that are talking about the benefits of addressable or controllable EV charging or water heaters, and you know, those are benefits not just to those kind of transportation or thermal sectors, but in terms of reducing costs and reducing strain on the grid and benefiting ratepayers and reducing electricity sector emissions. So, you know, I guess it's probably worth kind of separating those two things out. It sounded like from your presentation, Liz, you were thinking like any of those things that are cross-cutting by sector would just like live within, you know, a set of cross-sector recommendations, and that's just figured out within that chapter. But then there's this other category that are cross-cutting, you know, but even then, you know, just to take that specific example about addressable or controllable devices, you know, that's not just about the emissions reduction that the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee is primarily focused on. There's also resilience benefits to lowering peak loads. So I don't know, I guess it's just
Jared, can I make a suggestion there?
yeah.
Which is the example you're giving, right? Which is kind of like a demand management example that cuts across transportation, buildings, and electricity, energy kind of thing, right? That cross-sector mitigation, you know, subcommittee is uniquely positioned to deal with that, right? And you all can describe that pathway however you want to describe it, but it's kind of in your wheelhouse. You guys stick with it. You know, it doesn't require this kind of process that Liz is putting out there. This process is required because it does cut across subcommittees, or there isn't really a subcommittee that holds it, like education, right, or workforce development. Like there isn't really a logical home. So it needs this kind of separate process outside of the subcommittee process. That's the gist of this. But something like demand management, which is across sectors, you guys, you can do that pretty well in cross sector, I would imagine. And you can decide how you want to talk about it, but it's kind of yours to manage.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Helpful clarification.
If others agree with that. I think, can we circle back to the two questions that Liz put on the table? One is the sort of scope of compact settlement. And it sounds like you want a broadish scope. One thing, Liz, I don't know how much, you know, you think about this, but you know, when we've dealt in other states on this issue, you're explicitly talking about the dilemmas of your housing issues with how you do renewable energy siting, with how you deal with, you know, compact sort of transportation infrastructure and stuff like that, right? And walkable cities and all that is together, and that's why it's so cross-cutting. So I don't know if that's where people are thinking here, but certainly that's the reason it needs its kind of own thing, is it's very, you know, interwoven with these different pieces. Yeah. Okay. Kelly?
I'm going to have to run in a second, but I wanted to just say, so with the compact settlements thing, I feel like that was initially really for emissions reduction purposes. And I really like what Liz raised, which is, let's look at this as a resilient thing. And there are plenty of people in Vermont who don't want to live in compact settlements. Take anyone who's a farmer, right? You may need to live far from other people. And so looking at it holistically and looking at all of our citizens and helping to make sure that we have resilience and, you know, the infrastructure resilience and shared infrastructure and those things that Liz was saying, I think could benefit everybody. And it comes with emissions reduction as a byproduct. So flipping it on its head a little bit, whereas we were focused on emission reduction and then there's co-benefits from compact settlements, let's focus on the resilience things and we'll have the co-benefits of emissions reduction. That's how I would like to think about it in this next version, because I think it's become really increasingly obvious that while compact settlements are great, that's a very long-term thing that we can be planning for. But right now, our Vermonters need help and support for resilience today, or yesterday, or last year. So I think if we focus on that aspect of it, we'll be doing a service to our community and building a better plan. I have to run for a second, but I'll be back shortly.
Okay. And then Liz, on the issue of where it shows up, I think what I heard Jane say was these cross-cutting pathways would probably be up towards the top of the document, or at the top, I think was the comment that, and what's in that document that she shared. So I don't know if that influences the way you think about it, Liz, but that was the comment that Jane made as sort of a starting place for this.
Great. Yeah, I think this conversation's been helpful. I mean, to me, it's just maybe my overarching comment is, are we sure compact settlement is the right third description if what we really mean is infrastructure, resiliency, designed to also coordinate all the, when we rebuild a road in Vermont, we should no longer be just rebuilding a road, right? It should be so much more than that. And that goes for basically any infrastructure, whether it's housing, public infrastructure, or even, private development and how that gets looked at. So that
So
I
the
think
words,
is what I would put on the table.
Yeah. So the words you're using, Liz, are like shared infrastructure, something like that. Or, like, land and infrastructure use or something like that. I don't know. I'm not quite sure what you're thinking, but okay. All right. So just to take a step back. So the bigger picture here, folks, is really lasering in on these three topical areas, and we'll get the words right for compact settlement as we go forward. But lasering in on these three topical areas, and for each of them, having this sort of very discrete and focused process, really trying to keep it to 2 meetings, and in between those meetings, asking for some volunteers to help with writing and preparing. And that's the process to pull together some specific content that would go in an updated plan on these topics. Just triple checking that seems like a workable place for all of you. Okay, great. Okay. Back to our agenda. Incorporating just transitions principles visual guide. Kelly had to step away right at this moment when we needed this, so we might do a quick vamp on this. Why don't we switch gears and do the Climate Council governance document right now? And then when Kelly's back, she can walk us through that visual guide, if folks are okay with that. So this is the Climate Council governance document was updated to make a specific reference. Actually, Jane, if you could help just be real clear about the changes, like the one-line change that happened in this document, in this updated version.
Well, you'll recall that, as you just said, David, it's that explicit line. Would you like me to share it, or would you like to share it?
Yeah, I have it open if you tell me what page it's on, or you can share it, but either way.
It's under subcommittee membership. I don't know the page number, but it specifically says you must be a Vermont resident to be on a subcommittee. And then there was the question that Bram, above that on one page is the question that Bram brought up, which we can also speak to.
Yeah.
Is there a track change version online too, or no?
I don't think so. It's just this one. Sorry.
I thought we posted.
Liz, if you're able to update a track change version, but this is the line that was added.
Yeah. And then above is the point that Bram made about clarifying legislatively appointed members to the steering committee, that question about whether or not the House appointed members to the steering committee are voted on by House appointed council members or all legislatively appointed members.
Yeah. Right.
It is.
I can't remember exactly where that is, so help me out, Jane, where that is in this document.
Liz made the change, I think, so I,
Okay. Right. It was about choosing the steering committee membership.
exactly.
Okay, that's lower down. Okay, so concretely, this has been the update to it. And then this one, hang on one second, we're just gonna get the steering committee. Give me 1 second, I'm gonna stop sharing so I can find it without dizzying you all.
Thank you, David.
Looks
Yeah.
like it might be page 4 or 5.
Yeah. I'm just trying to get where they actually say how they're selected. Okay, here we go. So what it says is, this is for members of the steering committee, i.e. you all. The legislative members will be selected by and voted on by the councilors appointed by the legislature. And I believe last time it was even more specific, where it was like the Senate's appointed folks would pick the Senate appointed steering committee members, and so it was more cumbersome. And so it's just straightforward here of like the legislatively appointed members of the council will pick these 4 members of the steering committee, 2 from House appointees and 2 from Senate appointees. Okay. All right, so those are the 2 things that have happened in this document, that line right there, and then the one I was showing before about you must be a resident. Any questions about these changes or any concerns about them prior to approving them? All good? Jared?
I think I'm broadly good with both of them. The only question that's coming into my mind is a timing one around the steering committee, because the terms for the House and the Senate appointees are different. And the appointments, they were originally all made at the same time, but I believe it was the House appointments were initially for 2 years and the Senate appointments were originally for 3. And so now they're staggered, so they're not all coming up at the same time. And I can envision a scenario. I think what we did last time is said, okay, well, we know we've all of those appointments or reappointments have happened, and then we chose the steering committee. But you could imagine a scenario in which, the 2 House appointees who are on the steering committee or 2 Senate appointees who are on the steering committee rotate off at the time.
Sorry to interrupt, but there is a line on it right here. So I just want to give you a second to read that and then react if you don't mind.
Yeah. So then I'm just wondering if it does make sense to have it that the Senate appointments chosen because there could be a mismatch in terms of where the appointments are, not just for the steering committee members, but for the other folks who would be voting on that. I wonder if it actually helped avoid some, we had that situation before where there were a number of vacancies and there wasn't the ability to move things forward. And so if you linked it with the appointing body, then theoretically all of those would be happening. That consideration could happen at the same time. But
I'm not tracking you. I'm trying to track you. I'm doing my best. It might just be the COVID. I think if you're talking about this, the idea here is it's actually like a bigger selection of counselors because it's those from both the Senate and the House appointees. So I can't imagine how you get stymied. You'd have a bigger selection who are selecting and voting on.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's, a number of, say, one group, and I can't remember which group comes up first. I think it's the House appointments come up first, and then you've got a bunch of people voting on House or steering committee members from the House who are on the Senate side who aren't going to re-up for their appointment. And then those folks would be serving on the steering committee, you know, for multiple years after those folks have left. I'm just wondering whether there is a practical benefit to aligning those each body's steering committee representatives with, because they all
Oh,
have,
because they're like leaving, so it's like, it's weird that they're appointing people for the future, even though they're leaving.
yeah.
Oh, okay. Kelly, do you have a thought on that?
I was just gonna ask a clarifying question, and I think that's answered it, but
Okay. All right, so yeah, do people feel strongly about this?
I don't feel strongly. I'm just trying to anticipate potential practical challenges. If they arise, we can probably address them then. And
Okay.
there's probably enough flexibility in this language that we'll be able to do that without.
Okay.
well, and we could probably wait to appoint new members to the steering committee until we had we knew
Both
who was
sets.
going to be. Like,
Yeah.
we knew who, so the House will come up next, and we'll know who's stepping down. Hopefully, we'll know who's coming in, who's new, and then we can vote. Like, there may be a vacancy for a while,
Mhm.
but that would be more fair than having outgoing members vote for the new steering committee members before the incoming members are appointed. That makes sense. So if it's October 22nd or whatever, wait until November to vote new steering committee members on.
Right, so it's a timing thing. Yeah,
If that's possible, that would be more fair, I
okay.
think, and probably
yeah.
probably doable.
And just to be clear, we don't need to write language to do that. That's more of just a practice thing. Okay. Okay. Any concerns with approving the language the way it is, both this line and then the lower line there, it says you need to be a resident of Vermont to be on a subcommittee.
Confirm those were the only changes, just because we don't see the track changes.
Yeah, I apologize on that. That's unfortunate, but yeah, those are the only changes. Liz and Jane, right? There's nothing else going on in this document, just to confirm.
So those are the only changes.
Great, thank you. Okay. All right, so without any further concerns, let's officially say yes to these changes. Thank you all. Kelly, do you want to walk us through your, the Just Transitions visual guide?
Yes, I'd love to. Sorry, I had to step away there for a minute at the wrong moment.
It's all good.
Yes, so a little background on this. Just Transition Subcommittee held two meetings over the summer where we discussed the guiding principles document and talked about how we hope this is used, talked about maybe some things that are holding people back from using it effectively. And for a couple of these, we also had other co-chairs of other subcommittees there, which was great because we got some feedback from them. And one of the things that we heard was a lot of that other subcommittees were having trouble figuring out how they were going to implement these, and that the whole document was overwhelming and people didn't know where to start, and that our concern as a subcommittee was that would keep people from doing it at all. So we're trying to break this up into bite-sized pieces. And I think the guidance for subcommittees document that we already put out there, and I think David and Janie did a good job pulling out. I think that was you were the people behind pulling out certain questions from the guiding principles, and I thought that was great. And so we wanted to take that a little bit further and apply that kind of framework to our timeline. So the timeline you see across the top with the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is based on what we put together as a steering committee. And then Just Transitions added some other things that apply specifically to equity considerations to help people work through it in a way that's not overwhelming. So you'll see the actions are there in the ovals or circles, and they have little check boxes. So you can say, yes, we did this. Yes, we did this. And then below are some questions for the subcommittee to answer at each stage of the work. So hopefully this makes things a little bit easier. And if you want to scroll to the next page, we keep going through October, where we have stakeholder events and then prioritization. And then we'll continue to do a similar kind of format as we develop the timeline going into 2025. So this isn't the end of it, but this is the guidance we wanted to provide to subcommittees and to the council as a whole. But I think this will be most useful for subcommittees because that's the work that's being outlined here. And then on the very last page, so it's got 3 pages, we tried to make it easy to understand and easy to use. How can Just Transitions subcommittee support the other subcommittees doing this work? And we have liaisons to each of the other subcommittees. So they're a resource and they should be there at almost every meeting. But if the liaison isn't able to answer a question or feels that they're not qualified or something, or you want a wider group of people, asked to come to one of the Just Transition subcommittee meetings. And so if you have a specific question or something you're working through, or you've done an equity assessment and you want some feedback on, does this make sense? Am I hitting the mark? Come to one of our meetings. And so we just like to know ahead of time so we can put you on the schedule, but that would be another resource. And then if there's something that's just a process question or really urgent, the co-chairs and staff support are also available in between Just Transitions meetings, and our contact information is listed down below. So this is a document. The reason that our subcommittee looked at it in total one time and said, we like this well enough. We did a little bit of an update since our last meeting, which was only on Thursday, but we have a sense of urgency here just because we know the subcommittees are doing this work already, and we want to make sure that they feel confident that they can be embedding equity in everything they're doing and that they're not worried about doing it wrong or overwhelmed and not able to make a start on it. So we wanted to get this out sooner rather than later. Thanks, Liz. And I can't take credit for actually designing the document. I just sort of said some advice. So the people who worked on this did an amazing job, and I want to thank them all. So I guess the question is this something that we feel comfortable as a steering committee sending out to the subcommittees for them to review and potentially also bringing to the next full council meeting as well? And I know we usually look at it twice, so that's why I also wanted to say this was the sense of urgency. And is this the kind of document that we feel okay saying this is fine to go forward, or with these couple little edits? And I know you all haven't had a lot of time to look at it either because this was just updated very recently. So anyway, with that, I would pause and just find out what people think about moving this and sending this out sooner rather than later.
Thanks, Kelly. And I'll just mention that with process stuff like this, it's okay for you guys to look at it and approve it. It's usually with the content, we like to do things twice, right? Other reflections on this, or any concerns about sending it out to subcommittees? Secretary Moore?
I just want to say thank you. I think it is very helpful and would encourage us to get it out as quickly as possible.
Thanks. Other reflections? Jared?
Yeah, agreed. I think it's really well laid out, going to be very helpful. The one specific question I have is on the second page. I just know the 2 subcommittees that I'm really involved with, Science and Data and the Cross-Sector Mitigation Subcommittee, you know, there's been so much work that's been going into reviewing the existing recommendations and kind of assessing what new ones that's taking a little bit longer than I think was initially envisioned. And so the one thing that stood out to me is feeling a little bit difficult would be organizing 2 stakeholder outreach events in the month of October, given where we stand now. I don't know if at least those subcommittees, I don't know about the other subcommittees will be ready for that. I wonder if there's the ability to kind of spread that out a little bit, like 2 between October and November. But that's the one specific thing that seemed like it would be a little bit tight and difficult, at least.
Yeah. Yeah. We're all pushing. Yeah. Thoughts on the timing, particularly on those stakeholder events?
I mean, I have thoughts, but mostly because we have an unbelievably crammed engagement schedule that Sophie's worked really hard to put together a Gantt chart and timeline around the engagement for the CAP, our resilience implementation strategy, and with our analyses. And I will just say that October is sort of the month we have capacity from our office to really support those stakeholder meetings that for the CAP. The idea of the September council meeting is to talk about expectations for those and feedback. If things are not ready, then of course they're not meaningful to hold, but we should really be talking about that so sooner, because it's not easy to shift them, I don't think, much further back, and then you have holidays.
Yeah.
And I'll add that design and host bit was an update from what Just Transition Subcommittee saw on Thursday. And I think the previous version was more like attend some of the already organized stakeholder meetings. So
Okay.
I do think that, so this hasn't been vetted by our subcommittee. I'm sure they would all be like, yes, do your own outreach, find your target people and hear from them. But that obviously, I understand that there are practical limitations to that. So I think, you know, at a minimum, be out there listening to people and doing it in whatever way you possibly can, as much as you can. And so if there's an already organized meeting that you're like, whoa, this is actually already going to have the people I really need to talk to who are, you know, the frontline and impacted communities, that's great. And that would be a good thing to make sure your subcommittee is there and hearing from those folks.
Yeah, and so maybe part of this is just the question around the language. Like, as I first read this, it was like each subcommittee design and host 2 public stakeholder outreach events with the Climate Action Office's engagement team.
Is right.
that
I
is
think that's the intention.
That is right. That is exactly what it is.
With
Jared.
help, with help.
Yeah.
Like that's what the engagement team is there, is to, you
but
know.
this wouldn't be but are there already planned public engagement events that CAO with CBI is organizing that would be relevant to those subcommittees? Like, how much overlap would there be?
So
This is what we're
just
planning.
these are specific, and we should talk about this more at the council meeting, obviously, but these are very much modeled after what we held for the first CAP, and this is where, like, I'm not sure how far down the road you have to be. The idea is really that, like, I'm trying to think of like a good example.
Well, we did like we hosted for
Eco.
forestry community, or we hosted for, you know, folks like that.
For Ag and Eco last time we had 2. One was based on conservation and forestry practice recommendation, and one was based on agricultural recommendations. And then those interested parties were invited to the meetings, and we sort of talked about as a subcommittee what the recommendations and considerations were looking like, and then we heard from people where there were gaps, needs, should we be thinking about. So it very much, you shouldn't be done with your recommendations. You should have an idea of like what the key areas of work are, and then be inviting people in to give you recommendations. So I think it could be a good time, Jared, like based on where subcommittees are, because you shouldn't be done. And then of course,
I wasn't suggesting, I totally agree with you in that, in terms of where in the process the public engagement is useful. I just know that there's like multiple task groups meeting weekly. And so just in terms of the bandwidth to design and host these as an additional subcommittee task this month, because if they're going to be in October, it means they need to be planned and organized.
David and Sophie and Liz and I are meeting this week, I think, to actually really design them and think about the ask in a very strategic way. So these are very much supported by CBI and the CAO. And so I do think it'll be a lot of like guidance intended from subcommittees, but really led by contractual support, which will be good.
Great. Okay. Last comment here, and then we got to pause for public comment before we finish up.
I just wanted to also add, I think there's value in holding these as, so long as you are identifying the community you want to reach as a listening session. I don't think there needs to be a lot of presentation, maybe just a small amount of setting up the framework of this is what we're working on. But even if it gets off track by your standard, a listening session and taking that in and really hearing from people who are impacted is always valuable. So I think even if it doesn't feel very well designed, just having it at all with the right people in the right place is going to be so helpful.
Thanks. So great. So we will maybe Kelly, if there's any sort of final tweak you want to make to that design and host language to get it sort of what we've been talking about right now, we could do that and then get this out to subcommittees. This seems like it was a huge hit. So thank you, Kelly, and the whole Just Transitions subcommittee. It feels like this was the move to make right now. Thank you. Let's skip over that prioritization piece on the agenda. We don't have time for it. I want to make sure we have public comment time. That prioritization thing we can pick up as a steering committee in our next meeting. Yes. And so public comment, Annette, I see your hands up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on the compact village discussion and what Kelly said about that not all Vermonters want to live in compact villages. It's interesting to look at the history of Vermont. Vermont, we have this mythology that Vermont has a traditional settlement pattern, but that's not actually how Vermont initially settled. There's a really good book by Paul Searles called Two Vermonts that talks about how Vermont was originally settled uphill Vermont, and they stayed away from the valleys that were full of swamps and mosquitoes. So I think that's an important piece of Vermont's development history. I actually summarized and have it all in one email, the sections of his book that discuss it, because I found it to be very valuable in understanding Vermont's settlement patterns. There was also reference to subcommittees and meeting outside of the public for some things. And I'm unclear about the subcommittees are establishing working groups. And we already have the experience of some of them that have been done without any public participation or observation. And so I guess assuming that is going to continue, what I'd like to ask for is that the council create a page where it is noted what committees are meeting outside of the public view. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Annette. Other public comment? Okay.
If
Jared, go ahead. Yeah.
If it's okay, I just want to offer a clarifying response to something Annette Smith said at the end, which is there aren't any committees that are hosting meetings that aren't open to the public. There are small task groups that are doing drafting work that then go to the subcommittees to be discussed in public meetings. So I just want to be really clear. There are small task groups that are not the full or even a quorum of the subcommittee that are just having task group working meetings to be able to get material on a page that can then be reviewed in public by the full subcommittee. So I just want to be really clear about that.
Right. Thanks, Jared. Sort of like a writing group type. Yeah. Or a preparation group.
Drafting group. But all of those drafts then go to the subcommittee, and any decisions are only made, well, only any recommendations are made by the subcommittees, and any decisions are only made by the council. So there's no decisions being made by, you know, groups out of public view. I think that's really important to be clear about.
Okay. And thanks, Annette. I see what your request is in the chat. Okay. Anything else before we wrap up today, folks? All right. All right. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate this. We got a lot done today, despite our general head fog. And we will see you in 2 weeks, if not sooner, but 2 weeks at the council meeting. Thanks, everyone, and happy Monday. Have a good week. Take care.